Joined by Darren Dreger, TSN Hockey Insider, one half of the Rain Dregs Hockey Podcast, and our Wednesday regular. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Kind of eager for the playoffs to get underway, as we all are, right? With, I would say, most of the spots and the matchups being decided. I mean, there's still some stuff that's up in the air in terms of who's playing who, but it's been a fun week. There's been so much parity, particularly in the Western Conference. To see the Flames do what they've done and the Winnipeg Jets to lock down their spot and what's going on in the East, it's been an entertaining last 7 to 10 days.
Yeah. And, of course, one spot still to figure out in the East with the Island. Oh, boy, if you're Pittsburgh, you lose that game to Chicago last night, Drex. We have talked about the Penguins and how Hextall has been under fire. Could you imagine missing the playoffs with a loss to Chicago in the final week?
Yeah, I mean, it's ugly. There's no way to sugarcoat it. And they just have lacked a level of spark for a lengthy period of time here. And you look, when Ron Hextall took over as general manager, I mean, you didn't have to be, a significant goaltending figure in the National Hockey League to figure out that, his goaltending in Pittsburgh likely needed some attention. But then he comes in, and Tristan Jarry and the goaltending sort of stabilizes. So they go, maybe we don't need to address that issue. And I'm not so sure it's an issue. They've had some bad luck there with injury and whatnot. But isn't what the Pittsburgh Penguins are going through just cyclical in sport, period? Right? When you've got, dynamic figures like Crosby and Malkin and Chris Letang, and you have to lean on them. And the Penguins, because they've been good for so long, really haven't had the luxury of restocking their cupboards through draft and other means. They've tried to bring in some pieces, but with a cap and everything else, it's been so much of a struggle. But, we've talked about this, guys, on the show before. We're now at the end of the NHL regular season. It sure looks like the Penguins are out. And if that's the case, I think that ownership group, Fenway, is going to be aggressive in how they peel this thing apart. And that aggressiveness will likely start in management with a change there. And
who knows? Maybe they trade the Sun, Moon, and Stars for JT Miller.
Never know. At the other end of the ownership spectrum is Calgary, of course, just in terms of how they go about, things are committee-like there, and you don't necessarily get aggressive moves. I think all three of us on this call here want Brad Treliving to be a happy man because we all like Brad as a person. You have to believe he's in trouble. I mean, what a meek end to their season. And Daryl's just been re-signed. I mean, I could see a world in which they both leave, but I could see a world in which Brad leaves and Daryl doesn't. What do you suggest happens here?
Well, look, I'm with you there, Blake. But for me, doesn't it? You bring up ownership, and I don't know how involved ownership is. Most ownership groups are involved, and that goes beyond just being informed as to, okay, here's the strategy, here's the plan, here's the execution. I mean, it feels like it has to start with ownership and not just with the future of Brad Treliving. Brad has been with the Calgary Flames a long time. He's deeply respectful of that organization, but really the job of being a general manager in the National Hockey League. I'm sure he would tell you that it's one of the 32 best jobs there is, period. So is he so quick to just say, all right, well, my time is up here. I'm just going to see what's available if there's anything available. Or is he going to be the encouragement where ownership says, yeah, I think it's time that we go in a different direction. If that's the path of ownership, that's fine. That's their right. But if that's true, I hope that they spend some time with key figures on that roster. And I'm talking about Nazem Kadri. I'm talking about Jonathan Huberdeau. I'm talking about Jacob Markstrom. I'm talking about the veteran players for the Calgary Flames to get a real hard read, if not a forensic audit, of what went down this season. Because it was like Jonathan Huberdeau's offensive game just went off a cliff, right? He's a better player, far better player than what was realized this year in Calgary. Well, the player has to accept responsibility for that, but find out what's going on inside that room. What are you getting on the bench? Or more importantly, what aren't you getting in that room and what aren't you getting on the bench? So the more curious decision for me is Daryl Sutter. The contract expiration of Brad Treliving, I mean, that's an easy out if you want the out, or if Tree wants the out, then that's an easy situation for him to walk away from. If Daryl wants to coach the Calgary Flames, he's coaching the Calgary Flames, because it seems unlikely, given his relationship with ownership, that they're going to dust him at this point.
And it's funny because there's a school of thought with regards to sports ownership that, too many cooks. Calgary's had, and there's 4 primary owners now, but Calgary seems to be, I could be totally wrong here, but the Flames seem to have the alternative, Darren, where there's enough owners that they all sort of keep each other honest. Nobody meddles too much, and they hire good people and strive for stability.
It can risk stalling things out with the too many cooks mentality, but they make enough changes that it seems like it's working to some degree.
Yeah, and don't they have to start thinking about their new arena and getting that project underway? And the product on the ice doesn't always lend itself to enormous business decisions like this, but it doesn't help it either, right? I mean, going into this season, there wouldn't have been many people that guessed the Calgary Flames were going to be a non-playoff team this year. I mean, given the turnover, I think the expectation was that this team was going to be as good or better. And individually, the players have to take responsibility, but you can only make so many changes with your roster during the offseason, let alone in season. Then if you have questions with management, or you have questions, most importantly, with your head coach, you've got to determine that in the offseason to make any advancements.
The latest on Tanner Pearson, sir. What do you know? What are you hearing?
Yeah, I don't get the sense that there's a lot new there, other than, Tanner is still dealing with the medical issues that, kept him out of the Vancouver Canucks lineup for much of this season. And I don't get the sense that, he's, anywhere clear of some of the issues that are related, to that hand. And there's probably at least 1 or maybe even 2 more procedures that need to happen before the medical people have a full read on what Tanner Pearson's future looks like. And I saw my colleague Ellie Friedman talk about this and, the possibility of a grievance. Well, I think that's 100% accurate. I'm not here to question that in any way, shape, or form. But you don't know what you're questioning at this point, right? And you're not going to grieve until there's a reason to grieve. If all of a sudden Tanner Pearson gets through the remainder of the process and the recovery doesn't go as well as he's hoping, or everyone is hoping, then what? And that's what you're bracing for, is the then what. If he doesn't have full mobility in that hand moving forward, 100% mobility, well, that is going to interfere with his ability to be a good player in the National Hockey League. And then if that's the case, his future earnings most definitely are called into question. And then that's where you get the National Hockey League Players Association and the National Hockey League involved. And that's where a grievance becomes more real. Could it happen at some point in this offseason? I could, but I think that the representatives of Tanner Pearson and the Vancouver Canucks first need to see them get through this procedure of trying to get that hand back to where it needs to be before they can make that call.
There was only one coaching change made this season, and it's the Vancouver Canucks that make it. Well, why do you think that happened? And can it be as sinister as nobody wanted to get better because of Connor Bedard? Can it be as simple as that, or do you think there's extenuating circumstances like the amount of new coaches that started the season?
With Vancouver, you mean?
Well, no, why was there only one change in the NHL this season?
It is a good question. Bedard is unique, right? He's a bit of a unicorn when you look at the new player, and I guess we have to exclude Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl from that equation. I think that has something to do with it, but then I think of the Chicago Blackhawks, and that's a team that's gone through all sorts of trouble this year. They knew that was coming. Luke Richardson, I think, is going to be a terrific NHL coach. They made their change early, and he knew what he was getting into, so you live with it. Likewise with Marty St. Louis and the Montreal Canadiens. When I look at coaching and how that carousel may turn and then stop for some clubs, I guess the biggest question mark might be that of Dallas Eakins and the Anaheim Ducks, right? He's on an expiring deal there. It wouldn't have made sense for Pat Verbeek and the Ducks to make that coaching change in season, but there's certainly no guarantee, and I don't think there's been any discussion in Anaheim about an extension for Dallas Eakins. So that could be a part of it. You've got Bedard hanging there. You've got a team or teams across the NHL that want to stay in that mix. And why would you provide help? As long as the development of the younger players that you already have in-house isn't being hampered by suspect coaching, then it's probably fine to stay status quo.
Do you think the NHL cares at all about the lack of competitive games here at the end of the season? And this could be sour grapes here from a market that probably could have taken a better stab at Connor Bedard, but yeah. I've never read more about the need to level off the lottery. They made it steeper a few years back. Is it time that they level it off and maybe have the legislation in tow where the first team to miss the playoffs, the 19th place team, the 18th place team, they can't get the first overall. They can only jump up 7 spots or something like that. But to me, this back third of the season, from my perspective, it's just been dreadful. It's been dreadful to watch across the NHL.
Well, I know Deputy Commissioner Bill Daly spends a lot of time on this. I haven't heard of any reason, beside what you've said, Blake, and what we've seen, for the National Hockey League to revisit the draft lottery and the process that goes along with that. But I guarantee you they have those conversations based on what you just acknowledged, probably on an annual basis. But then you're reminded of the Chicago Blackhawks beating the Pittsburgh Penguins. You're looking at, the Arizona Coyotes, a team that has tried as hard as they possibly can to tear that organization down to the ground so that they can build it one more time up through the draft. And the Arizona Coyotes continue to win hockey games. So I know those are one-offs, and you don't see these bottom feeder teams go on much of a roll. But I think, again, the commissioner's office would submit that as long as teams are staying in games and they remain competitive, just the mere hope and expectation of not getting Bedard, getting a good pick, breathes new life into the environment, into the organization, and by extension, maybe into that fan base. So it doesn't seem to be a front burner issue, and maybe it should be at this point.
Just backpedaling here a little bit. It's 10 head coaches hired prior to this season in the summer, and 2 more hired in the second half of last year, Marty St. Louis and Jay Woodcroft. So a ton of coaching turnover over the last year. I think that's part of the reason why we only saw the one Rick Tocchet here for Bruce Boudreau in the season. Drag says, we have long joked here. The Vancouver Canucks could be the feeder team for the U.S. national team. Our friend Dollywall tells us that...
and the U.S. and the Russian teams.
Well, our friend Dollywall tells us that he doesn't anticipate Quinn Hughes and JT Miller to play for Team USA, but there would be a bunch of other candidates for Team USA, as well as candidates for other teams. Team Sweden, Nils Oman, we think, is going to go. Who knows about Elias, as well as some other nationalities. Take us through the process. Does it happen? Do players get approached like as soon as their club is eliminated from postseason contention? Do they wait till the end of the year? Is there some breathing room after the end of the year? And what's your sense on Connor Bedard playing for Canada? Yeah,
well, normally Hockey Canada management would reach out to the club, and in certain cases they reach out to the player agent as well, right? Just to say, hey, obviously you're non-playoff players, so we have interest in bringing you overseas. It's much easier for the European federations and for the Russians, as we've already talked about here. I mean, it's almost expected if they're healthy, then if they're asked to play for their country, then they play for their country. I think that there's a bit of a deterrent here in that the NHL and the Players Association don't have the World Cup solidified. And that was something that Marty Walsh talked about, not in relation to the men's Worlds, but just how that's priority for him. Regardless of what's happening with Russia and the Russian invasion of Ukraine, I mean, you can adjust. The Russians are either in or they're out at a later date. But you first have to build the framework of what that World Cup in 2025 is going to look like. And if that was an official event, then maybe you do have, players who are getting calls from USA Hockey and from Hockey Canada who otherwise are on the fence going, I'm a young guy. I didn't have a great year. I had an okay year, but I'd really like to be on the radar for that World Cup. So I'm going to do everything I can, and that means I'll accept the invitation here. But because that hasn't been solidified, it's pretty easy for these guys to say it's been a hard year. I just want to rest. I need a break. I need time to decompress, to catch my breath. And maybe I'll be back again next year. And just to wrap up your thought on Bedard here for a second, Matt, that's exactly where he's at. And Hockey Canada is very respectful. This kid is just coming off an emotional playoff series with Regina Pats. He knows his junior career is over. He played in the World Juniors in the summer. He played in the World Juniors at Christmas. It's been a heck of a year for Connor Bedard and then some, both nationally and internationally. So they're going to take their time, and they're going to give him time. There's going to be zero pressure. It feels like it would be a bit of a surprise if Bedard was to accept the invitation, just based on everything he's been through.
Dreger Cafe? We're going to get a Dreger Cafe? Or?
We're not, unfortunately. We might have Dreger Cafe at the Memorial Cup in Kamloops.
Oh,
yeah, that's being discussed. Yeah.
Right down the road here.
Right. I mean, traditionally, it's kind of been saved for the Men's World Championship, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things happening, and the Memorial Cup in Kamloops is. I went to the Memorial Cup last year, not for the full event, didn't take the Dreger Cafe, but had a heck of a time. So just decided this year that maybe we'd up the ante.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you've done the Dreger Cafe from the Old Town Square in Prague and the Champs-Élysées in Paris, then, on the banks of the mighty Thompson in Kamloops seems like a natural.
It 100% does, for sure.
That's the podium of tourist places in the world, really. Yes.
It's a great junior hockey town with a rich junior hockey history, and it's going to put on a fantastic event. Thank you for this, my friend. Until next Wednesday.
Okay, guys. Thank you.